It was a really nice place. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Affirmative Interaction. I'm Jordan Smart. We are back. I was not here last week, and I will not tell you what I was doing. But we're so happy.
He was sleeping. Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
We are so happy that you have decided to join us and be a part of our show once again. Can you believe that we have reached our 27th episode? We blew past our 25th like it was nothing. And we're at 27 episodes, just kind of wild. This show has, of course, been more or less a response to something that we just wanted to do during COVID, but I think it's really blossomed to something even better. So let's keep doing what we are good at Affirmative Interaction, and that is talking about things that are important. So this week, there has been a lot of things going on with the confirmation of a new justice on the Supreme Court. Mike, if you could, walk us briefly on what is happening this week so we can then open in that discussion. But before we do, just want to check in with everyone that is watching with us and really want to thank Logan for his cheery and fun atmosphere that he brings to this show. And I also love your shirt. If you are watching with us today, please let us know where you're watching from. And we would love to know how you're interacting with us, whether Facebook, YouTube. And of course, we are also providing our show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So I do want to check in real quick with everyone here. How are you guys doing? I know we're in the thick of it now. The election is coming up. What are your thoughts so far that the election is coming? What do you think? How does that make you feel?
Y'all on mute.
I'm not muted. I voted last week. So sent in my ballot to Missouri. That's Trump's gonna win.
Oh God.
Probably.
Yeah, we voted too. Sent in our ballots. It was really easy in Maryland. They had just the ballot booth like at different locations across Maryland. And so they sent us like a 2-page paper of it had to be like 30 or 40 different locations where the ballots were. And so you could just drive to any of them and drop them off. Super easy. Within a couple of days, I got a notification letting me know that they had it and they're, going through all that stuff. So honestly, I feel like I don't know why it should be complicated for anyone. It took us like 2 minutes to fill that thing out. And then, there are a couple we wanted to Google, but besides those, the process didn't seem too difficult. And then we were good. I'm optimistic about this election, honestly. I know we've got some PTSD with 2016, but I think Trump's going to lose personally. So,
no, knock on wood.
Yeah.
Jeez.
My fault. Let me.
This guy said, "Yo."
Well, some people are optimistic. Not everyone's optimistic. gotta be fair and balanced here. Yeah.
Trump is also optimistic, so.
Yeah, optimism abounds. So I voted last week too here in Michigan, the battleground state, and so we had our vote week last week. Really excited. Registered like right around 100 students, like first time voters, and so really happy about that. Have been registering a few more. We've had some stragglers come in. Hey, is that voting week thing this week? No, but we still got applications, so come through. And so we're still getting people plugged in. And so I voted. The absentee ballots were kind of playing games in Michigan. Like they were supposed to, statutorily, they're supposed to send them at the latest September 24th. And I didn't receive mine until it was last week, like on I can't remember the date now, but it was a couple weeks after that. And it should have only took like a day or two to get to me from the clerk. So, anywho, got it. I actually brought my mail-in ballot to the clerk's office in person just to cut out all the middle person stuff or the drop box fears or whatever. And so excited about it. And you know, I've been keeping track on like early voting, lots of different states, and there are lots of long lines and people are waiting and they're voting. And so although long lines is tough because it should be way easier to vote, the fact that people are persevering and doing their civic duty and saying, we don't care how long it's going to take, we're going to do it, is really giving me some hope in the midst of some dark news we've been getting in recent weeks. And so I share in Adrian's optimism. Of course, we're knocking on wood, but hopefully things go the way we hope they go.
That's facts. I have to agree with that because I definitely am trying to be hopeful as Adrian and you are, Mike. My ballot has come in the mail, and I've just been excited to just hear a lot of, you know, news reports that there's record voting or record voter turnout. There's a ton of people requesting ballots, a ton of people staying in line, making sure that they get their vote in. And I just think it's just, I don't know. Like, I think 2020 has just been a year of constantly being stunned, but the flagrant voter suppression is almost laughable. Like, it's actually laughable. But I am excited to get Trump out of office because I feel like once Biden is in, the direction this pandemic goes is just going to really shake things up. Like, yeah, I'm not going to go. I mean, I've been thinking about that all day because it affects work, obviously. But I'm happy you guys are doing well and that you're getting your votes in too. So, again, if any of you guys are also watching at home, shout out to Curtis, Prevo, saying that he is going to go vote next week. Debbie Williams is also saying that voter suppression is happening. So be vigilant. I think it's important for us to be really aware of this. I think this is between 2016 and 2020. For one, have been like, my radars have really been up in terms of how flagrant voter suppression has been. I feel like the more we're plugged in, hopefully the closer we can to be getting some true policy that can change that. So glad everyone is doing well, and I'm glad that my field goal hand gestures are in full effect. So things have been happening this week, just like we were saying before. Amy Coney Barrett is on the heels of being what's the word?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Thank you. On the heels of being confirmed as the next Supreme Court justice. From what I've been seeing, a lot of Democrats have been, really grilling her on questions of abortion, questions of if she would repeal, Obamacare in its entirety or pieces of Obamacare, what her opinions are on a lot of liberal, I would say, what's on the liberal agenda. So, Mike, could you kind of break this down in simple terms? Because I kind of feel like a lot of us or a lot of people that may even be watching aren't really hip to what really goes on in the Supreme Court, as this is something that's really been brought into the spotlight recently.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the first thing I was going to say is the Comey thing has been really tough for me too. I actually, and I think I put this in the chat the other day. I actually was watching. I finished the Comey Rule last night, the 2-part series, which is literally, it's a must watch. I mean, the thing that's so crazy about that is, as things are happening, you start to remember all these headlines of things that Trump and people in his administration did. But as you're watching it, you're like, oh, that happened. But it's like, oh yeah, that was all reported on and it was all public knowledge. So you find yourself surprised by information that's not new, which kind of reminds you how crazy this presidency is. But so with Coney Barrett in her confirmation hearing, it's been interesting. I mean, I've the first day I followed it a lot. I think that the long and short of it and the really pertinent, and we'll talk about our reactions, but what it really boils down to is that before there was a nominee to the Supreme Court, Republicans essentially unilaterally, other than two, Susan Collins and Murkowski, all pretty much came out and said, we're voting to confirm before there was even a person. And so what that should communicate to all of us is that this whole confirmation hearing process is a game, it's a show, it's a sham. Because if you say that you're going to do something before there's even a person presented for you to evaluate, then the evaluation process is pretty meaningless. And so I followed it because I think it's important for me, the biggest thing has been, how are Democratic senators going to hold Republican senators to account for the way that they have just completely gone back on everything that they said in 2016 in particular. And it's just so ironic, Lindsey Graham, who's chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee in 2018, with Trump in office, with the Senate majority, and so the presidency and the Senate being the same party, with all that being known, said that if a vacancy came in the last year of Trump's his last year in his presidency, that they wouldn't confirm someone. And he's doing the complete opposite and hasn't explained why he's changed his mind, and doesn't need to, because they don't care. The whole thing that's the huge takeaway for me is, when the rules work for what I like, I'll follow the rules. But when the rules don't work for what I like, I'll change them. And because I have a majority in the Senate, I can do that. So that's McConnell and Graham. That's how they're operating about this. The hearings in particular, I'll just say quickly, it's gone pretty much as expected for the most part. Coney Barrett has not answered a lot of pertinent questions on things we'd really want to know her feelings about, like the ACA, like Roe v. Wade, like the Obergefell v. Hodges case on gay marriage. There are a couple moments that I thought were kind of interesting, but you had to kind of pay close attention to hear her sort of giving what her perspective would be on certain things. One thing I'll mention is when Senator Booker was giving her different hypotheticals, and these were around Title VII civil rights protections, and gave her a hypothetical on race and on gender. And she basically said, yeah, Title VII would protect that, and that shouldn't happen based on race, based on gender. When he extended that to religion, she quickly connected that to saying, well, I think you're trying to ask me a fact pattern that's connected to the Baker case, around whether or not a baker with a religious conviction could decide to not service, for example, a same-sex marriage, wedding and that kind of, or reception, that kind of thing. And she decided to not opine on that, on whether or not someone should deny service based on their religious conviction. And she said, well, I'm not going to give an answer to that. But she did answer it for race and gender. So that sort of communicated to me some of people's fears about how she does rely upon her religious persuasions and convictions in deciding her cases, and in deciding what's worthy of protection and what's not. And that should be really fearful to any progressive American when you start to see that. And my feeling is, in the face of silence, you rely upon what the person has said. Most recently, she said multiple times that she thought that the Supreme Court's decision on the ACA was wrong, and she signed on as a private citizen, and as recently as 2016, to statements declaring that Roe v. Wade should be overturned. So if you're not going to show up and say, well, I've changed my mind on that, I'll assume your mind hasn't changed. Yeah. So, and she also, the last quick thing I'll say in this very long intro now, is that she also did not list Roe v. Wade as one of the things that she would characterize as what they call in the legal field a super precedent, things that are not likely or shouldn't be overturned. She decided based on her opinion. And she said she's relying upon, literature, which doesn't include it as a super precedent, but she definitely made it clear that she doesn't see Roe as a super precedent, which means that it could potentially be overturned in the future. So, a long story short, the question for me and for all of us is going to be, how much more can we learn about this person who is in all likelihood going to be confirmed to the court, because there's nothing that can be done tangibly by Democrats to stop it. I'm really upset. At least I haven't seen anybody ask her about her 2016 comments after Scalia passed, about the fact that not only did she say that it shouldn't be filled until the next election, but she also talks about the fact that Obama nominating someone to the court would shift the perspective of the court. Right. So she also made a viewpoint argument. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how, unless she's going to commit to RBG's viewpoints, which she clearly is not, as she has, been really gracious about talking about her legacy. Well, her legal perspective is the exact opposite. And so she unequivocally, equates to a shift in the perspective of the court. I mean, it's clear. So it's questionable to me that she thought that in 2016, but now that she can benefit from them jamming a nomination through for her, she feels differently as well. So Senate Republicans have found someone who can flip-flop just as them, and that should also make us really, really concerned as well. Yeah, it'll continue on for another day or so, and then they'll vote on it pretty soon. And we'll see how Democrats respond if they have the opportunity to. But that's sort of my takes thus far. I'd love to hear from you all on what you've been sort of taking from it.
So I want to ask everyone this question, because a lot of what you said kind of, piqued my interest, wink, wink, to this idea of, is it actually possible for someone that is going to be confirmed as a new Supreme Court justice to really and unequivocally say that I will eschew all of my personal beliefs when I make decisions? Like, are we essentially expecting justices to be robots once they get on the court? Because I hear a lot of that, and I heard a lot of that when Brett Kavanaugh was getting confirmed, and it always confused me. So why is that language used when we honestly know that it's very hard to leave your bias out of major decisions that you're making, especially as a justice on the Supreme Court?
They say there's no biases, but go ahead, Esther.
No, you can go.
No, I was just gonna say, they say there's no biases, but you can tell. It's really interesting because it's almost like they call them legal biases. Are you an originalist? Are you a textualist? Like, how do you interpret the wordings and the laws and the writings? And it's really interesting because Amy Coney Barrett very clearly believes really traditional ideas. She believes in very minimal amounts of progress. And I felt that that's been kind of just like at the forefront of her conversation. And they say like, oh, we're not biased, but it's like, well, you are. You do have a tilt in which you want to like understand the law. And it's really funny, Michael, as you were kind of speaking, and today as I've been listening, it feels like Amy Coney Barrett is really willing to answer any question that will allow Republicans to continue to support her. Like, her only goal in this is to make sure that she can hold on to 51 Republican votes, knowing that those are the people that she has to appease. She doesn't really care if she appeases the Democrats. It's like, all I want to do is not answer a question that'll mess me up enough to hurt a Mitt Romney or one of these middle moderate Republicans, to make sure that I can keep 50 votes even, because then Mike Pence could break the tie. Because I heard that when she was talking to Booker, when she was talking to Kamala, she would like answer and she would play the game, but she would answer anything a Republican said because she knew that she was hearing questions that the Republicans supported. But she would always draw that line when it would get to an abortion question, when it would get to a same-sex marriage or, these types of questions. She would kind of really get into like, I don't want to say anything because these groups don't really agree with what I might say. So let me just throw out a BS excuse to say, I shouldn't comment on that. And it's funny because she kept throwing out Supreme Court cases saying like, I'm not supposed to comment on Supreme Court cases in a Supreme Court hearing, but she would just like lead herself to that and be like, and it was just very clearly that she was trying to appease Republicans. And that's like all she's here for. I'm not here. And it's interesting because unless you have an ear for it, you're just like, oh, she seems nice, reasonable, polite. She's, laughing whenever you're just a casual viewer. But when you start to tune your ear in a little bit, you're like, oh, she's really dodging questions that could be problematic for a lot of things to come in our near future and in the next generation. As society, we vote more liberal every year, and we're going to have Supreme Courts that are willing to turn us back in time, especially as these justices get older and older and older. It can be scary.
Yeah, to answer your question, Jordan, I think that like ideally when they're talking about your personal biases versus your position as a justice, ideally they're saying you can feel your own personal convictions about abortion, about gay marriage, about all of these various issues. You can feel however you feel about them, but your job as a justice is to decide based on what the law says, does the law support this, right? Like, if I personally think abortion is wrong, that's one thing. But if I'm going to sit on the bench, can I look at a case and say, objectively, even though I feel this way, the law says this and it upholds this, etc. But I think the problem with that is that how you view policy and how you view ethics and morality is like so closely tied together. It always has been, because you have to use one type of thinking to justify the other. And that's always been done. It's always been weaponized. You can look all the way back to slavery, right? You had to weaponize people's own personal prejudices and biases in order to get people to support policies like slavery. So you have to get people to a point where they can interpret policy in some way, and you do that by manipulating how they view their morals and ethics and how you treat other people. So I think it's really, really difficult to sever those two things from each other for any person, because it goes both ways. You use one to justify the other, I think, pretty much all the time. And I think the more politicized our personal beliefs become, like we're at a point now where like your personal identity, your everything about ourselves is somehow playing in the political sphere. And so it's going to become harder and harder to separate those two things from each other, because as I said, you're always going to use one to justify the other. So if you're a person who believes that abortion is wrong and you believe it to the point where, like a key example, I remember in my ethics class that you were in at Andrews, when they talked about abortion, he said everything about the abortion conversation hinges on whether or not you consider a fetus to be life. Like, when do you consider life to begin? And that is going to taint how you view it both morally and politically. Because if you believe that life begins at conception, then you're going to say, okay, that's wrong morally and also politically. Well, it's murder. So I have a right now to project my personal beliefs about this on other people, because like murder is objectively wrong, right? Like you can't sever them, because how you're viewing it is viewing how you interpret it politically and legally. So I think it's impossible.
Yeah, and I would also say from some of the comments that I saw and noticed her make, she talked about like her integrity wouldn't be jeopardized. That was something I heard her mention a couple of times. But I feel like one of the things that really it is somewhat frustrating, that it's like, listen, we're not idiots. you were chosen from a Republican presidency because they saw that your views tilted in the conservative direction. And so for you to then step into this space and make the subtle insinuation that isn't playing a role in what has brought you to where you are right now is kind of like condescending in a way, because it's like your position has been politicized because so many Republicans want to overturn Roe v. Wade. And so they are trying to go through the legal route in having it overturned. They're placing you into that position for a political purpose. And that, I think, is where it becomes frustrating when I hear her choosing not to answer questions, because she'll, what I saw from a lot of people on Twitter, where they try to frame it as Supreme Court has to be in some ways like apolitical, and so by choosing to give a response, she is essentially like choosing a side, so to speak. And so she has to answer things in theory or in hypotheticals, and say that she just has to take things as a case-by-case matter. I think the frustrating thing that comes down to it for me personally is some of these things are not a case-by-case matter. Like some of these things, it really is right versus wrong. When she's asked a question about climate change and she's not really giving like an answer, that's wrong, because climate change exists, right? Like that, when they talk about things that do with race, and like things in her background came up, and she in a previous case that she had, she talked about how like the N-word, the usage of it could not be seen as like creating a harmful work environment. That's wrong. Like, so when I see that, and then I see that she chooses not to answer certain questions that should be like morally objective, that is concerning, because it's like, well, listen, I understand that climate change has been politicized, but one side of the partisanship issue is wrong in this conversation. And you as a judge have to be able to realize that. You have to be able to name that. And that, I think, is
Yo, they froze.
So while Adrian is getting back online, I have to say I do resonate with a lot of things that he's saying in terms of, it's and actually I'll just say this, and Mike, I think the more and more. Okay, Adrian, you can go ahead. You can continue.
Sorry. Well, I was going to end that point is, I think what I really want to see Democrats push in some of the latter questions is some of these things are not partisan. And I know that Republicans and conservatives have tried their best to frame it that way so that they can have leverage in the conversation, as in this is what we believe versus this is what they believe. But that cannot always work when facts are in the conversation, like climate change. Facts are in the conversation. It is not a both sides thing where someone and another person are coming with their viewpoints clashing. As a judge, you have to be able to see that in an objective way. And that, I think, is what's been concerning. In certain instances, she should answer because it is the right thing to do there. And that I haven't seen it, and that has been what's concerning.
I definitely resonate with what you're saying and where you're coming from. And I think a part of me, just because I have to say I'm fairly new to just like learning about this process, which is, I think, pretty standard with how politics have become. Like things get really big and then people start to learn about it. But besides that, it really makes me think about what Mike was saying a few weeks ago in terms of, is the Supreme Court something that is still relevant today? Does it still work? And I feel like, especially after how, COVID has swept through our country, it's made me personally start to think about, what in our democracy works and what doesn't work? Should we be looking at things maybe a little bit more critically, because it is putting the decisions for generations to come in the hands of wealthy, predominantly wealthy white men? Does that benefit us or does that harm us? And I wonder what you guys what your thoughts on that question is.
Yeah. So real quick before I jump to that, I wanted to and it'll tie in with what I'm saying in regards to your first question, because I think it's a really important one in regards to how does one's viewpoint intersect with your judicial opinions or your judicial decision making. And so what I do want to say is that and I think a lot of the Democratic senators have even made this point, is that the evaluation of, we should really think about this confirmation thing as a process as opposed to a hearing, because it isn't really about a hearing on her qualifications to be a judge. I mean, she sits in the Seventh Circuit. Yeah. She's competent. She's legally accomplished, and her, although there may be some concerns about sort of, some of her personal views, she could very easily, fit in with one of the perspectives that we have on the court right now. So I don't want to act as if she's some off of the wall, unqualified person, because that's not the case.
Very qualified.
Yeah, for sure. But what I would say is that I think this question on how one makes what people rely upon, what justices rely upon to make their decisions, is important, because there are three things out of five that are sort of universally accepted as where justices look when they're making their decisions. The first one is the text, so textualism, the text and structure of the Constitution originally. The second one is the intent that the framers of the Constitution had in, not just the text that they wrote down, but what did they mean when they put that text down, and how do you get to that? And then the third thing are past judicial opinion, so stare decisis is what they call that. So those three things everyone use in some kind of a way. But then there are these two other factors. The first one is more to what Adrian was talking about, and it's more of like a natural law approach around what is right, what is wrong, and how does my understanding of what's right and wrong affect how I understand and look at any particular case. And the other thing is, what are the economic and political and social implications of this decision? And so that's when it turns into more of a, do you believe in the Constitution being what they call a living document, or is it more static? And are you looking at the original text? And where do you fall on that line? And so Barrett's definitely, much more of an originalist, textualist in the ilk of Scalia. And what that says is that as time progresses and as you have new, more contemporary questions, and if someone doesn't necessarily see the document as a living one, that can have an effect on how they ultimately, view people. Because, and I think it was a couple of different Democratic senators did this, but I think Booker in particular did a really good job of trying to zero the conversation in on how does this affect people. And of course, all the different senators did that by sharing the stories of people who could be affected by losing the ACA coverage. And there's two ways you can respond to that. One way is to say, all right, in spite of maybe my personal persuasions on things, what are the real life implications of how I may rule on this particular case? And the other way is to say, well, if I don't see it as connected to something that was originally wrote in this document, then that's not my problem. It's out, And so the question really becomes, how workable over time is that? And how, what potential does that have to cut people out who are vulnerable and who need certain protections and who are gaining those protections through legislation, empathetic legislation, that if it will find itself being scrutinized by a very originalist or textualist court, a lot of different protections could end up being in trouble. The other thing that folks keep talking about is that, oh, well, we've had 9 justices since like the mid 1800s. Well, I mean, we also had slavery in the mid 1800s. So just because of the fact that we've had something for a long time doesn't mean that it always has to be that way. And that if it were to change, that the world would explode. And so Republicans are really getting scared about this whole packing the court thing, or I would call it actually balancing the court, because they're packing the court right now, even though I'm not trying to characterize it that way. And so I think we do need to rethink, to your question, second question now, Jordan, how we think about the structures that we have that affect the way that people are governed, whether or not they are working. I mean, it's clear there's a problem, just period, and the Republicans have won this political fight. But ought to be clear, there is a problem with the Supreme Court or our court system in general being politicized, because the pendulum will swing to the left, knock on wood, hopefully. And, just because we may agree more with the people that they'll pack courts with, it's just going to turn into this tit for tat game. And then now you have a court system that's just, the third wing of our politics. And that's not supposed to be that's not what it's supposed to be, And so it's either somebody with a clear mind and with some real leadership capability as an adult in the room to sit down and say, all right, everyone, like, we've had this, 10 plus year period of politicizing the court. We need to bring the courts back to what they were intended. I mean, let's be originalist about what the role of the court was supposed to be. How about we do that? And the original intent was to say, look, you're here to call, to use a baseball terminology, you're here to call balls and strikes, not to reframe what the strike zone is. Okay. That's what you're supposed to be here for. And it's clearly moved away from that. And you maybe have examples on either side of a particular persuasion. But if it doesn't get back to that, it's just going to really just turn into more and more of a fiasco, because, okay, the Democrats add 4 seats. Then, 8 years from now, when, Donald Trump Jr. gets elected, do they add 16? Like, I mean, do we have 300 people on the Supreme Court when we're all
JK?
Hey, JK. Yeah, sorry. But, it's just like, after a while, it's like, all right, well, then why are we even paying attention to it for? Who's going to read 100 opinions per case? It's ludicrous after a certain point. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that? Because my understanding of what originalism of what it means to be an originalist is that she and other originalists take the stance that, like, the Constitution, like you said, it's not a living document. So there are certain rights that it cannot protect. So if those rights want to be protected, they can't go through the courts. You have to go through the legislative body. Is that like an accurate understanding of what it means to be an originalist before I ask my question?
Yeah, essentially it's what were the rights that originally were meant to be protected by the framers of the Constitution. Okay.
Yeah. So if that is what it means to be an originalist, and it essentially means certain things just don't go through the court. Like you can't use the court to afford or protect rights that weren't originally there at the beginning, and you have to use the legislative process instead. Maybe I am missing something, but doesn't that line of thinking also then, doesn't that apoliticize the courts? Like, isn't that what that would effectively do if we can't use them for this, like, what I'm saying? I'm not trying to give it credit, but that's where my mind.
I think that's what it was intended to do. And I think when it's applied accurately, it should do that. But I think, it's one of those things where I think ultimately at the end of the day, you know, one person's originalism could look like another person's, you know, progressive. It's a living documentism. That's not even really a thing, but so I think for, you know, like for example, I can't think of like cases off the top of my head right now, but Scalia is really seen as sort of like the champion of, you know, originalism and the textualist. Right. But I mean, there were even times where you can see him kind of veering out on that on a particular, you know, issue or thing that you know, he had a particular viewpoint on, you know. And I think at the end of the day, it's just really impossible to remove someone because originalism is a viewpoint. So like there's this idea that like someone chooses a viewpoint because of what they believe about the law. And so what you believe about the law and how it should be interpreted ultimately is going to inform how you apply what you call originalism, you know? And so it goes without saying that someone like Scalia clearly was conservative, clearly Republican leaning, and he governed. I mean, he judged from that perspective. Now, to your point, the question is ultimately, you know, are you using that to create legislation or whatever the case may be? And an originalist would say, you know, we're not supposed to do that. But you can't run away from the fact that your decision on a particular law's constitutionality is going to create stare decisis precedent, which now will be used in the future. You know, not necessarily the same as a statute or, you know, other legislation would be used, but it's new law. It's the common law, you know, is what we call that. And so now, in future cases, they're going to use your holding or your ruling to say, well, this is how this particular law should be interpreted because they ruled on it in a particular way. So I think that after a while, you know, when you start from the baseline definition, it sounds like, oh yeah, this should depoliticize it. But you have folks that are being nominated by presidents who are typically Democrat or Republican. And so they're being nominated by persons who have a particular viewpoint because that viewpoint aligns with the judge that they're nominating. And they want that viewpoint to be represented for a lifetime on the court. And so, although I mean, there's examples of, like, for example, a lot of people get mad at Justice Roberts because he's conservative, but he has crossed over, quote unquote, on different cases to the consternation of a lot of conservatives. And so it's not like it's always going to be like a one-to-one, like they're going to do things this way. But the issue with putting someone on like Barrett on the court, and now you have 6 firm conservatives to sort of work from, is that it's going to be really difficult to have 2 people join a liberal minority on really any case, unless it's pretty stark, you know, pretty blatantly obvious that it should go that way. So
yeah, they've been talking about how now the middle of the Supreme Court like has really shifted to the right, where, you know, to get that, it's like a Kavanaugh is having to be a middle ground Republican, and he's really seen as a pretty traditional conservative, and so yeah, it could be really difficult, and they could basically shoot down anything that the Senate and House present, and then just be like, yeah, we're not interested in that. Which is, it's interesting how a mistake of Donald Trump ended up being a 3-justice mistake, you know, where we ended up with Kavanaugh. Now we're going to get Barrett. We had Neil Gorsuch, you know, back in 2017, and it's just like very frustrating to kind of see how Trump's impacted generations and generations of this. Jordan is muted.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts. I definitely think we have a lot to think about in terms of SCOTUS, and even if we know for a fact that she will be confirmed, I guess I'm glad that at least more people like us, more young people, are more hip to the conversation and kind of understand what's happening politically. So moving on to our next topic.
I said thanks for calling me young. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course, of course. Young at heart. So, guys, thank you for, again, sharing your thoughts. And if you are streaming with us, please feel free to comment. Let us know what you think about what we're discussing. Sorry if we've had any issues on Facebook. To our knowledge, we're streaming well on there. So, today, Kenneth Walker was interviewed by CBS, or at least his interview was released by CBS this morning. And of course, he is the boyfriend of Breonna Taylor. And he went on to detail the happenings of what occurred the night that she was killed. Adrian, can you tell us a little bit more about the story Kenneth Walker told and what this means about her case and what it means about Breonna Taylor's story?
Yeah, so I think when I gathered, and if you all have watched it, it's pretty much going viral online. All you have to do is just Google his name, and the video will probably come up. There are a number of things that I think, at least for me, stand out when you put together the pieces of information that investigators and journalists already pulled, and you try to hear his story and you put them together. In many ways, it just further exonerates Kenneth and Breonna for just a number of reasons. For example, in the interview, he talked about how, it's the middle of the night. And so if he had heard the officers announce themselves, one, he wouldn't have pulled his gun out. Two, he would have went straight to the door. Three, you can hear, not just in the interview, but in the recording that was pulled in his 911 call, where he is clearly unaware of what is going on. He tells the operator that, hey, someone is trying to break into my apartment and I don't know what's going on. And then when things start to settle, he hears people, a number of men outside talking loudly, and he assumed that these are police officers. But what he said that I think is very important is he thought that these were the officers responding to his call. And so he comes outside thinking, thank God the cops are here to catch this maniac that just broke inside into our apartment. And then there is proceeded to be a ton of yelling. They're screaming at him. At one point, when he gets outside, he doesn't have socks on, shoes on. He's just walking barefoot with no jacket, none of it. He says, what's happening? What's going on? And the officer responds by saying, you're going to effing prison. That's what's happening. And then at that point, you start to hear him he's crying out, I don't know what happened. We didn't know who you guys were. We didn't hear you. And the officers are kind of just ignoring him, walk, keep going, not really responding to what Kenneth is saying, which to me, when I hear that, I don't know what goes on through the psyche of an officer, but I would like to believe at some point the officers could have at least said, we announced ourselves multiple times and you refuse to acknowledge us. But those words were never uttered. And then there were other things where Kenneth mentioned that one of the officers asked, were you injured by any of the bullets? I think one officer shot 10 times, another one shot 6, and another one shot 16 times. And then Kenneth says no. And the officer said, that's unfortunate. And so when you start to hear all of these pieces come together, it becomes very difficult to believe that the officers handled this in the best way. And it becomes even more unbelievable to accept that they did announce themselves, because everything after that, the way that they handled it, not just with lackluster approach, but the kind of apathy and arrogance does not reflect an officer that is handling it the right way. And then they have another moment where they talk about how an officer in an unmarked vehicle, he comes in and then he says, hey, this has all been a little bit of a misunderstanding. They finally drive him down to the police station. They take the cuffs off of him. He's kind of allowed to walk around and roam freely, which clearly tells us that they know that they've made a mistake, because you don't do that to a guy that just shot at an officer if you didn't think that you made a mistake in resulting in the consequences that had just transpired. And then there are other things I think is super unfortunate. Like, he found out that Breonna died while he was in his cell and the TV was on, and it said that one female victim died in the crossfire. And then there are other instances where even in some of the body camera, the officers finally come in after Kenneth is pulled out and they see the woman on the ground. And I think they say, I don't remember the exact terminology, but I think they said something like, she's done. That was the language that they used. And it's very telling that throughout none of that encounter, like, we knew that ambulance was called, but they didn't bring the ambulance inside. But at no point did the officers really ever go and check, to my knowledge at least, did they ever go and check to see, is Breonna alive or is she okay? Even though they heard Kenneth pleading multiple times that she was there, that she was shot. And so it's really, it's not just tragic, but like it infuriates you when you start to hear it from his perspective, because his story makes so much sense. All of it makes so much sense, especially when you add the information from what we already had that was investigated from journalists. And yeah, man, it just sucks, because it's like they were just living their life, and then all of this happened because officers failed to do their job.
Yeah, it's definitely it's really interesting, because we always hear in these situations that police are looking for the bad. They're even cops hate the bad policing, the bad cops, the bad apples, as many people say. But then we see it, like, and this isn't a hypothetical of bad behavior by police. This is just the reality. When you look at the police stories, the people in the apartments that got interviewed by different people, and there was only one guy that said he possibly could have heard, out of the 12 people in the complex, possibly could have heard them say police, but even he was like, yeah, I think I felt like I hear them yell that. But that could have been at any point during that whole ordeal, just like really messy. But now we see this and we hear him speak, and we're like, this was clearly, even with their ruling to say that they shot the drywall of the neighbor's building, like, it's very clear that they're saying, like, yeah, this is a really prime example to make examples out of bad policing. And that's the thing, is like, no one's going to label these cops as like terrible people. They're going to label them as cops that overused or misused their authority and didn't go by protocol and did things the wrong way. But they clearly don't want scenarios to be better. They just want to protect the image of cops. That's all that this is about. This isn't about bringing justice to people. This isn't about protecting people or serving people. This is about them trying to pump criminality and crime rates and pump arrests, trying to close cases and finish these situations. And they don't really care by what means that they do these things. And this is just a prime example. For a man to call the police while being shot at by the police, like, it's never going to make your story sound
right,
like it makes any sense. Why, if I'm trying to shoot police, would I be like, hey, police, could you come help me? I need your help because I'm shooting you. Like that, it just doesn't make sense. And when you hear that, he's literally saying someone's kicking in my door and shooting at us and they shot my girlfriend. like it's just so clear. And whenever I found out he was walking around the police station because they knew they had messed up, like even the cops were like, oh shoot, this is a really bad situation by us. But when it went to the grand jury, they're like, look, we're going to protect you. You've got lawyers and unions. Don't worry. And it's like, why would we not want to use this not as like to make an example out of the police, to just bring justice to these people, to say this wasn't done or handled properly, and so we're going to make right by this. I mean, it's just insane. There's no bad or there's no good apples looking for bad apples. It's just they're an apple orchard and they're worried about their own fruit. Like that's really what it is, and what it seems like it always will be.
I definitely agree with that, Logan, because at the end of the day, we just need to address the systemic issues that are in our police system. And I feel like justice is never served because I would say the countrywide or most police systems out there, or stations, or however you want to call it, they don't want to receive the reckoning that they've been due for years. They don't want things to change. They like the way things are. So even before we find out something negligent and terrible has happened, they've already come up with a story to make sure it's an open and closed case.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's well said by all of you. Yeah, I don't know. It was really tough to watch the interview, for sure. I was pretty affected by it, and I mean, I think I said this on social media or something, like I didn't know that I could get more upset about the Breonna Taylor case because it was just already so infuriating. I mean, all of them are so infuriating. It's hard to scale them. You know what I mean? Because it's just like it just keeps happening. But it's just wild, like the reputations of 4 officers were way more important than an innocent woman who was killed. Just let that sink in. I mean, I think that, honestly, yeah. Do I want officers to perform better? Of course you do. But can we at least start with the baseline of when you don't perform well, you're held accountable? Like, I feel like if we could at least have that baseline, it's like, all right, well, at least we're working from somewhere. You know what I mean? But when you have a system that is, set up, to disproportionately affect persons of color, Black people in particular, and when those persons are, killed, chewed up, and spit out by a racist system, every benefit of the doubt is given to, shoddy police work and bad police officers and, bad apples, like, Logan was talking about, like they always try to say. Or if they are held accountable, they just go to the next county over and get hired, and oftentimes in a better position, So it's just like, if Kenneth Walker was dead, we wouldn't know any of this. And that's the thing that we have to know. Like, we know that for a fact. That's not a hypothetical. If Kenneth Walker was dead, we probably wouldn't even, and he said it in his interview, we probably wouldn't even know. We wouldn't know Breonna Taylor's name. We wouldn't know his name. They would have found some way to connect those persons to the person they were actually looking for. And, oh, okay, look, they were part of a drug ring. They deserve to die. And that would have been that, My heart really just breaks for Kenneth. They were planning to eventually get married. They already picked a child's name. He started buying clothes and shoes for the child. Yeah, it's just really, 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 really sad, man. It's infuriating, sad, and nobody's gonna, they're not gonna be held accountable. because again, like the reputations of law enforcement and protecting the shield and all this other bull crap is more important than that. She wasn't pregnant, Wu, but Kenneth talked about the fact that they had talked about getting married and having children, and they'd already picked out a name. So yeah, so when you think now on the macro level again, and you hear, you know, Trump and other politicians talk about law and order and all this other like crap that they just say to categorically dismiss people like Kenneth Walker and Breonna Taylor, understand that like this is what that means. What it means is that, you know, if we kill you, we kill you. So what? Like, you know, who cares? It's a tough job. So, you know, it is what it is. And so it's really demoralizing. It's depressing. And my heart just really goes out to him because he's clearly in pain. He's clearly, I mean, I don't know that you ever get over something like that. How could you get over something like that? And, you know, someone who he was wanting to be his life partner was taken from him for no reason. For no reason. And that's tough, man. That's a tough pill to swallow. And again, nobody's going to be held accountable.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of what you were saying, Nix. And I honestly, like, I've struggled with this case a lot for a number of reasons. One, I think is definitely like, I don't know what it is about Breonna, but every time I see a picture of her, every time I learn something about her, she feels very familiar to me. I don't know how to explain it. I saw somebody tweet something the other day where they were like, she was one of us. And that's like, like more than any other victim, I think I feel that with Breonna. Like she feels very much like familiar, like I know people in my life like her, like I could know her, you know, like that when I see her picture, when I hear things about her life and her story, like she reminds me of real people in my life. And that I think has made this a lot more heartbreaking for me. I think it feels much more closer to home. And like the sense of how severely the people around her, how their lives were interrupted, like that is hitting a lot more close to home. And it's really making me just think about how tired I am and how exhausted I am of Black people just having to be so hurt and so angry all the time. Like I just every time I hear clips of like the protests or people in her life who knew her, like that's just the thought that keeps coming to mind, is that like it's just very exhausting and infuriating. Just that we live in this state all the time. Yeah. I also like, I always try to look at the legal implications of things. And I try to separate out like, okay, my own personal feelings and look at it from a perspective of like, what would actually work like in a court. Like I remember thinking about that with Trayvon Martin when they didn't get him for first-degree murder, and it was like, well, they couldn't prove intent or whatever it was. Like ever since that, I've always been like, okay, well, now I need to start looking at these things from the perspective of like, well, what, like, as things are working now, as the system runs now, like what would actually work here? Like what would get some sort of justice through the system that we currently have? Because it's not going to drastically change anytime soon. And I think I even asked this question the last time that we talked about Breonna Taylor of like, well, what is reasonable? Because I honestly didn't know. Like, I knew that protesters and her family even had been like asking about for a murder charge. And I just know like, that's not going to work here. Like, that's just not, it wouldn't work. Right. Like, we know that he shot first. Like we know that wouldn't work. It like wouldn't hold up in court. And so I like honestly have done like a lot of reading. Like I don't really like I was just like I just don't understand like what is the thing that makes sense here. And the thing that I keep coming back to that's been mentioned is like it pretty much all just hinges on the moment when they knock on the door and whether or not they identified themselves as police, right? And we know already, like you guys have said from testimony and witnesses, that they most likely did not. Like pretty much the only thing that we have that would say that they did is the cops themselves, which I understand, like there are people in the world who just really trust cops. And I think that's honestly the difference maker here is like, do you trust cops or do you not trust cops? Because if you trust cops, then when they say that they identified themselves, you're going to believe they did. No matter what else you hear, you're going to say, nope, I believe cops. I think that they are good. I trust them. If they said they identified themselves, they did. And that's it. If you do not trust cops, like I think many of us, then even if you're like just objective, I think you'd be like, okay, well, you have all of these witnesses on this side who have no perceivable motive to try to sway this case in any one way, one direction or the other, who are saying that they did not hear them announce themselves. And you would say, I think the evidence weighs heavier on the side that they didn't identify themselves. And if you can say that, then everything else that happens after it is like, well, it's their fault. If you knock on somebody's door, but you don't identify who you are, the people inside are going to be afraid, especially the way that you are knocking. And if you then proceed to start to break down their door, they're going to do what they need to do to defend themselves. Everything that happens after that moment all happens because they didn't identify themselves as police. And I think that in and of itself shows one of two things. Like I was like, let me Google these things so I understand. You either have to say like this was negligent behavior, like criminally negligent behavior. Like you had a duty of care in this instance, right? You're either going to perform your no-knock warrant where people don't have a chance to respond and you just bang through their house and you do what you're going to do and you detain them and that whatever and they have no opportunity to do anything. You have that option. Or you knock on the door, you identify yourselves as police so that they know what's happening and they proceed accordingly. Those are your two options. They didn't do either of those. They did this weird thing in between that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And because of that, everything else went the way it did. And that's logical to think if I bang on somebody's door, but I don't tell them who I am, something is going to happen. That is logical, especially if you think that you're banging on the door of somebody who is involved in some large drug illegal system. Like if you think that's what you're doing, even though we know that wasn't, but if you think that's what you're doing, then you know if I am banging on this door and I'm not identifying myself, that person is likely armed, likely is going to think that somebody is here to harm them, to do whatever, and this could go south. Like it's logical. So at the very least, I'm like, I just don't understand why they weren't all charged with criminal negligence. Like that's negligent behavior. Followed by the fact with the ambulance and they didn't go in to check on Breonna Taylor. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that the attorney general did everything that he could to present the grand jury with charges that could make sense here. Like if all you presented them with was like, you either go full on murder or you go for this whatever wanton endangerment. Like then people are going to be like, well, I guess, it doesn't line up with this extreme thing. So I guess we're going for this other charge that you have offered. But like, there's definitely other things that would align and would make sense and would hold all of them accountable. Yeah. And I think when I looked it up, like, it was like if it's involuntary manslaughter via criminal negligence, it's like a 5 to 10 year sentence. Like, that's a huge difference from what we're seeing right now. And it would be all three of them. So, and I know in his speech, the Attorney General said, like, sometimes the law just isn't sufficient. Like, it doesn't, sometimes the law just, I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially saying, like, sometimes the law just doesn't have what it needs to respond to tragedies, right? But, like, sure, maybe that's true sometimes, but this isn't one of them. Like, there are laws and charges that apply here that could adequately, I think, respond to this specific tragedy. They exist. You just didn't pursue them.
Yeah.
Definitely very well said. And I just have to echo a lot of your sentiments here that it is incredibly frustrating. And even watching Kenneth Walker be interviewed and going over the story again, it honestly felt a little re-traumatizing as something that we are still wrestling with, still tackling with. So let's definitely just keep Breonna Taylor's family and her loved ones in our prayers, and keep Kenneth Walker in our prayers. And hopefully we can continue to push for something to change, for the outcome to be different. Hopefully there will be no next time, but if there is, we do hope justice can be served properly. So, Logan, I've heard
real quick, Jordan, just on that, on the re-traumatizing piece, I just want to say real quick, just to maybe give honor to this, because I feel like it's something we're maybe all dealing with. You touched on something really key there, because one of the things that are especially difficult about all of these different cases, and it's really coming up with Breonna now, is it's just kind of like, what do you do with the frustration and anger? You know, it's like when we heard what we knew we were going to hear about the insufficient charges, and then now the fact that it's even worse that that's the case after hearing from Kenneth, you just have this unresolved frustration, pain, and anger that, like, it's just like, where do you put it? Because they've said we're not doing anything about it. And it's just like, so I think that's just part of the compounding difficulty of all of these incidents, is that they do keep coming back to our minds, you know, in different instances, because there's no resolution. And obviously that's even so much worse for the families of the victims. And then we've even seen family members of victims, you know, like Erica Garner and like others, ultimately end up dying themselves, largely due to the health complications of having that added stress and anger and all those different things that compound upon a person's health, not even just their mental health. And so there's just a legacy of pain that just continues. And so, yeah, I don't know what to do with it. I have no answers for that, but it's just something that continues to compound, and it's just really difficult.
Yeah, and I think that is also what plays into, like, what you see happen in some of these protests. It's like, yo, where else am I supposed to release this? You know, and then you kind of get told that, like, oh, you know, you're labeled as thugs, or, like, you know, Antifa gets thrown in there, as in, like, they're out of control. But I feel like that when you see the rioting and the looting, it almost feels like a natural response to, like, years of gaslighting your experience, where you keep telling us that justice and the law, going through the political correct procedures, that is your friend, right? You do this and then the law will help you. But when you keep seeing, like, the law used in a way that is either against you or is designed in a way where it's designed in a way that's insufficient to help you, like what we saw, the way it was framed with Breonna Taylor, like the AG tried to make it, he presents it in a way where it's like, there just isn't a charge that can make it feel sufficient based on the way the law is created right now. when you kind of see that just compiled up, like years upon years upon years, I don't know, like this is why like I'm nervous to quickly condemn rioters and looters, even though I personally wouldn't partake in it, because it's like, nah, man, like what else do you do with that kind of frustration that is weighing you down? And then you're told that this law is supposed to be the one that relieves you of that pain because it gives you that justice, but then it doesn't provide you that justice, and then you hear people try to justify it. Man, it just feels like you're just going in circles. And yeah, I get it. People are like, oh, enough is enough of it. And I don't know. I just wanted to say that out there for, people who may be kind of struggling with the morality of something like the riots or the looters that we see. Is just that stemming from something that is being unanswered. And I don't know if people are focusing on the right things here.
Yeah, that's all very true. All very true. So guys, thank you for sharing. And really quickly, we just do want to touch on something that we've all been thinking about and talking about as we discuss show topics. And that is kind of what's going on with this very strange dueling town hall situation that's happening between Joe Biden and Trump. So Logan, as Trump's least enthusiastic fan, I want you to just let us know what's going on with these dueling town halls.
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully all of y'all watched the first debate where Joe Biden tried to talk about things very poorly, and then Donald Trump just interrupted him the whole time. That's basically what happened. Called him a radical communist most of the debate. So I think Trump learned in that he can't lie to everyone on a stage without Joe Biden telling everyone that he's lying. I think that really bothered Trump. So he got COVID, as you remember, because he doesn't wear masks and has mass gatherings of thousands of people, because he's not a competent human being. And so after that, they tried to do a virtual like Zoom debate, and he was like, I won't do it. I'm not doing a Zoom debate. And so he's basically, and he's not doing it, not because he doesn't want to do a Zoom debate, but because his ratings fell, or his polling dropped like 8 points after the first debate. So he's like, why would I do another debate so people can hate me even more? They essentially ended on a decent note with the VP debate. I thought Pence was kind of a dork, but at least he wasn't shouting over Kamala the whole time, like Trump would do. And Trump then called her a monster the next day, which hurt his, he's just an idiot. No offense, with all due respect, as they say. But basically today, last week or something, Biden announced that he was going to do a town hall since they can't do a debate. He was going to do like tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Well, Trump, I guess, hit up NBC News. I don't know how he has their number because he only watches Fox and Friends, but he hits up NBC News and basically says, can I do a town hall at the exact same time? So it's basically a debate of two television networks. Like, he's doing an outdoor town hall. It's like the second debate was supposed to be a town hall where people ask you questions and you answer. But Trump, NBC News, first of all, forget y'all, because you're playing into the hands. And I know that they would destroy you, but you could have just said, hey, we're going to do it, but we're going to do it right after theirs ends. So they'll do an hour, then you could do an hour, and people could. It's just dumb. It's dumb because Trump is trying to do anything to manipulate. And Trump has lied for 5 years now, saying the media is nonsense, but it's all him. And he's just going to continue to manipulate the narratives because he doesn't want someone to actually oppose him, because Trump doesn't tell the truth. He stands up there. He's going to go to a town hall and call Joe Biden a communist and a radical socialist that wants to eliminate like fracking. And Trump couldn't even tell you what fracking is. He has no fracking clue, to say it that way. And it's just hilarious to like watch him try to bend over backwards to do the same thing. It's just stupid. Trump's just like, he's just doing anything to not lose an election that he's losing. And it's on NBC because I don't know. He probably paid them $750 because that's the amount that he pays people.
I honestly think that NBC is trying to be as unbiased, but then also they don't want to be partisan. They want to be as bipartisan as possible. So we'll bring our network enemy on air. But I think the issue is, and I saw Katie Couric tweet this out, having dueling town halls is really bad for our democracy. Town halls shouldn't be competing against each other. By definition, that's not what a town hall is. That's a debate. So if Trump doesn't want to debate with Joe Biden, that's a separate issue. But the solution isn't to have two dueling town halls on the same night, and I believe at the same exact time. Because by then, we're literally going to be comparing ratings the next day instead of policies and things that the candidates want to bring to the table.
I think I'm also struggling with like the political strategy behind this decision. Partly because I feel like when you lose a boxing match, right, and it's kind of polarized, like who won, who lost. The next thing that people are going to talk about is, well, when is part two? When are they going to have that rematch, right? And I feel like I don't understand the strategy behind Trump saying, I'm just going to have my own town hall when you need to win back some of the support you've lost over the last 4.5 years. I'm not entirely sure how speaking in your own echo chamber is going to reach the conservatives, the suburban women, and the Republicans that have left him. I don't know how that's going to help, right? We know what he's going to say at these town halls. He's going to keep repeating the same talking points, the talking points that have been debunked, the talking points that make no sense, and the talking points that have been shown are lies. We know Biden is not some radical leftist politician. That has been something that we've been disappointed with. Honestly, I wish he was a communist, but we know that's not true. And that's I feel like would it not make more sense to have a debate where you can at least push Biden a bit more, talking about the Supreme Court packing? I know it's a silly thing, but you put Biden on the defensive end there, right? I guess I don't know, how does this help him gain back more voters? It's the same tactic he's used, and he's always been down in the polls against Biden. I don't understand that. I don't know if y'all can, is there something I'm missing here?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think it's, Trump's gonna Trump, man. He wants to explode everything. That's what he did during the first debate. And if he can't, share the stage with Biden in the way that he wants to, well, he's just gonna have a ratings war now, and that's what it's all gonna be about. And Biden had a town hall last night. Nobody was watching. They were all watching me. And that's literally all it's gonna be. Who cares what questions he answered? No one was watching the failing network he was on. And NBC, I had The Apprentice on NBC, and it was, it was beautiful. They needed to bring me back to get the ratings up, and it was beautiful. So that's literally he'll probably be live tweeting during his town hall how his ratings are better. So it's just it's just comical. Who's he even going to be receiving questions from? Usually at a town hall they mix it up, and if he is framing, if him and his team are framing the rules for this town hall, which they have to be, because there's no way that Trump is going to leave himself at the mercy of how NBC wants to run a town hall. It's just going to be ludicrous questions that are super softball. He'll be giving tweets as answers, and he'll just he'll probably have like a small TV on the stage with Biden's town hall and just like crack little jokes. Like it's it's gonna be ridiculous, So I don't know. I don't think that it will necessarily help him one way or another. It will, his base will be happy, which is thankfully shrinking. But I think that it's really weird that NBC sort of capitulated to whatever it is he wants, because I feel like that's the only way that it's actually going to happen. Because if they push back in any way, he probably would have just took it to he create his own. He'd probably do it on YouTube or something. Who knows? I mean, he would have just went somewhere else, and
he would force broadcast it onto everyone's devices.
Yeah, so he would have done it on WhiteHouse.gov and exactly. He sent out like an Amber Alert or something, which is terrible. But he would have done something stupid like that. So
said Cheeto Alert.
I love a good Cheeto in the afternoon. After a long day of work, has a great crunch. So we're just gonna have to see how this town hall goes, of how both of these town halls go, and I just have to say, man, Trump is a disruptive person, and when he cannot disrupt, he just simply finds another way to disrupt. A nightmare for Trump is to be in a situation where it's not controlled by him, where he cannot bully, and where he has to actually answer questions in a sensible manner. And him being sick and the potential of doing a debate over Skype where his mic could be muted, where he's not physically present, is a nightmare. So this is clearly why he went this direction. All right, great. So enough about town halls. I honestly just also feel like the town hall might just be like a church board, a church business meeting, but we'll see. So before we wrap up today, we're of course going to be circling around and doing our PMIs. So if you guys could quickly let us know what piqued your interest today. Of course, it could be a TV show, film, movie, book, music, or maybe even a meme you saw the other day. Please share it with us. Esther, let's start with you.
My PMI is an album by, I'm honestly not sure to say his name, Samo. I'm not sure. The album is
Oui.
Okay. Album is called Clear. It's very good. It's like R&B, but actually like church music. And there's a song on there called I'll Be Okay that is very uplifting, and I suggest everybody listen to it.
I'm honestly definitely gonna peep that because I got a rejection email today from a job that I wanted to get, so that's gonna be helpful. Mike, could you share with us next, please?
Yeah, sure. Let me just grab this link real quick. So I want to share. I'll put the link in the chat here. It's a book called Native: Identity, Belonging, and Rediscovering God. It's by Caitlin B. Curtis. She is a Native American Christian, and she's from the Potawatomi tribe. And Andrew sits on Potawatomi territory. And it was Indigenous Peoples Day this past Monday. And so it's a really interesting book. I've just kind of started to crack into it, talking about identity, soul searching, and how to honor that Native heritage within a theological system like Christianity, which, of course, as we know, heavily colonized and very dismissive of Native identity. So, yeah, hope everyone would check that out.
Excellent. Adrian, could you share with us next, please?
Yes. So I am reading a book that was encouraged by Ta-Nehisi Coates on his IG page. It's called The Color of Money, Black Banks, and the Racial Wealth Gap. It's written by, I think I'm going to butcher this person's name, but Mahersa Baradaran. The book, I think, is fascinating because it's filled with a lot of information that I think if you have spent some time reading about like what took place during the Reconstruction era, you're familiar with some of it, but it talks about how so much of the problems and concerns surrounding the racial wealth gap, it truly does come down to housing and banking. Though those two are like the pillars of it. And the author takes you through like a history lesson of how like you see Black Americans making these strides to like provide a more equitable future for themselves, but like there's these barriers that keep coming up, and it's always racially motivated. So I think it really just kind of, at least for me, like destroys the myth of like Black people have not been trying these things, the handout, narrative, victimhood. Like it abolishes all of that myth and takes you through a clear line of, it's not about victimhood when these are real barriers. And yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who loves history like I do. Yeah, man, this is probably one of the better books I've read. The way they just kind of written and contextualized the topic. So
Excellent. And Logan, could you share for us, please?
Yeah, 1 second. Gotta get prepped for this.
Oh boy.
Here it is. Pique my interest right here.
I knew it.
Yeah, let's go.
Oh my God.
We're not JR right now. The Lakers. J.R. Smith in the building. Lakers 2020 bubble champs. Let's go for Kobe. For Kobe Bryant. Number 4 for LeBron. Let's go. Jordan.
I would like to apologize.
Reporters is spam. Reporters is spam. Oh no.
My PMI is a podcast called No Compromise. It's about how 3 brothers made a social media empire based on gun rights and loving guns. It's by NPR. Check it out. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Affirmative Interaction, and we hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Vote, please.
yes, vote.
On a shirt.
Dear God.